Moses killed someone. What are we supposed to do with that? Some claim that proves that prophets are very imperfect, and therefore it's okay that we don't trust the first presidency. Is that right? Let's talk about that. Our first question to consider is whether Moses' killing was a sin. Second, if one determines that Moses' act was a sin, does that justify disregarding the first presidency? Before jumping into those questions, let's review the story, the details of Moses' killing. We don't have a lot of detail. After Moses was grown, quote, he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, end quote. The next day, Moses saw conflict between two Hebrews, and when he questioned one of them, the response was, quote, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killedst the Egyptian? End quote. When Pharaoh found out, he sought to slay Moses. Moses fled to Midian. That's all in Exodus 2. We learn some additional details from Stephen in Acts 7. We learn that Moses was 40 years old at the time. Stephen describes the killing as Moses seeing one, quote, suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian, end quote. Well, with that sparse background, let's examine our first question. Was that a sin? Now, unlike the 116 pages, the scriptures do not tell us that Moses' killing was a sin, and I can't find any discussion of that question in general conference. But killing is obviously generally prohibited. The Lord has repeatedly declared the imperative, thou shalt not kill. In Doctrine and Covenants 42:18, thou shalt not kill is followed by, quote, and he that kills shall not have forgiveness in this world, nor in the world to come, end quote. Joseph Smith also said that a murderer, quote, that sheds innocent blood cannot have forgiveness, end quote. There's no question that killing is generally prohibited and very serious. Nonetheless, there are some exceptions to this prohibition in Scripture. For example, when God commands it, we see this in the life of Abraham regarding Isaac. We also see it with Nephi and Laban. We see many instances in the Old Testament where the Lord commands the children of Israel to destroy another nation. Another category of exceptions to the prohibition on killing that we see in scriptures is for defense. In Exodus 22:2, we see that in ancient Israel, you weren't culpable if you killed a thief who breaks in at night. Doctrine and Covenants 134:11 states, quote, men are justified in defending themselves, their friends, and property, and the government from the unlawful assaults and encroachments of all person in times of exigency, where immediate appeal cannot be made to the laws for relief afforded, end quote. In the book of Alma, we see that God authorizes the Nephites to defend themselves from the Lamanites, quote, even unto bloodshed, end quote. Another exception exists where God has specified capital punishment for a sin. There's actually a fairly long list in the Old Testament, including adultery, fornication, rape, murder, blasphemy, and defiling the Sabbath day. So, does an exception apply here? Yes, there must be. I'm not certain which one, but to me, there's no avoiding that this was not the unforgivable sin of killing described in Doctrine and Covenants 42. To me, it's clear that if any part of Moses' action was sinful, he must have been forgiven to have been in the holy places and had the holy experiences that he later had. Later, he sees God face to face. God tells him, I have chosen thee. I am with thee even unto the end of thy days. He saw a vision where he saw all the inhabitants of the earth. He saw the creation, the fall. He was God's instrument in delivering Israel. All the miracles involved with Pharaoh and parting the Red Sea. He performed miracles in the wilderness. He received the 10 Commandments. And his ministry did not end with mortality. He appeared unto Peter, James, and John, and Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Alma teaches us that Moses was translated, and Joseph Fielding Smith taught that this was necessary in order for Moses to restore his keys on the heads of Peter, James, and John. Moses also restored the keys of the gathering of Israel to Joseph Smith in the Kirtland Temple. And he was among the righteous that Joseph F. Smith saw in his vision of the spirit world in Doctrine and Covenants 138. For all of those reasons, to me it seems either he was fully forgiven of some version of killing that wasn't unforgivable, or it wasn't a sin at all. Again, I'm not certain what circumstances render it either a lesser sin or not a sin at all, because the scriptures provide so little detail. Stephen, again, described it as defense, so that's my best guess. Naturally, one might ask, what about the fact that Moses first looked both ways and afterwards hid the body and then fled? That's not what I would do if I acted in self-defense or defense of an innocent. I mean, what does Moses have to hide? Part of my response is that it's important that we avoid presentism, judging an ancient event by modern standards, in this case, modern legal standards. Today, at least in the U.S., and there are similarities in many other nations, we have due process, a Bill of Rights, a presumption of innocence, Miranda rights, the right to legal counsel, jury trials, evidentiary procedures, and appellate courts. I'm not an expert on Egypt, but I understand that Moses in Egypt had nothing like our modern rule of law. My understanding is that slaves in Egypt had some rights. They could get married, own property. Slaves could defend themselves in court, but they would not guarantee a formal trial, impartial judges, evidentiary rules, right to appeal, or freedom from torture. Furthermore, this was still a monarchy. Pharaoh's will was supreme. There was no legal mechanism to check his power. If he declared a ruling or a punishment, there was nothing between him and that outcome. The text itself shows that Pharaoh did not intend to investigate or try Moses. He sought to slay Moses, not to arrest him. In that world, hiding a body and fleeing do not necessarily imply guilt as it might today. It may simply reflect the realities of an ancient system with few protections for the accused. In short, I don't think the facts that Moses checked to make sure no one was watching, hid the body, and later fled, individually or collectively, constitute a particularly strong argument that Moses committed a sin. Now, as we conclude our analysis of this question of whether Moses sinned, I want to make some quick caveats. I hope it's obvious that even if I conclude that Moses' killing was not a sin, that's not the same thing as concluding that any other particular killing is not sinful or not illegal. Again, killing is almost universally prohibited. Of course, even if we conclude that Moses was not wrong to kill in this case, that does not mean that Moses or any other prophet is flawless. We all know that Moses and other prophets are human. They commit sins. They make mistakes. They freely admit this, and Scripture sometimes even records it. Moving on to our second question. If I think that Moses did sin, does that in fact cast doubt on later First Presidency's declarations? I believe there are 5 matters that each need to be addressed in order to get from Moses' sin to not trusting a current First Presidency. These points largely overlap with the considerations outlined regarding the 116 pages, Abraham's lie and Jacob's lie. And we have a separate video about each of those events and their implications. So we will be really brief here. First, there is no evidence of the Lord rebuking Moses or withholding a blessing or spiritual experience from Moses. As we noted earlier, if it was a sin, Moses must have repented, though there's no record of that. Second, consistency. Many have used this event to justify questioning the first presidency on a given matter. But they still stay in the church and follow other first presidency statements. If I get to pick which statements I follow and use Moses to justify disregarding those I don't like, it seems like I'm just picking and choosing, like I'm my own prophet. Third, there's a difference between a personal sin and the truthfulness of a teaching. Joseph Smith declared this unambiguously, quote, "I never told you I was perfect, but there is no error in the revelations which I have taught," end quote. Fourth, the record of Moses seeing the Lord and performing miracles, the burning bush, etc., all occur after Moses killed the Egyptian. Moses' killing does not seem to be an example of a prophet's actions, but of a future prophet's actions. Paul and Alma, among others, make it clear that those are not the same thing. Lastly, even if I get comfortable with those 4 points, I need to bear in mind that the church today is led by unanimous decision of 3 prophets, often joined by 12 other prophets. First presidency declarations are not made by one person who could be having a bad day. It's not nearly as simple as saying, I don't support the first presidency on this statement because Moses killed the guy. There's a huge gap between those, and I think all 5 of these points we discussed need to be addressed in order to span that gap. And among those that accuse Moses in this way, I've never heard any of them address any of these points. Thanks for watching. We hope this is helpful to you in your journey of discipleship to Jesus Christ.